I'm Alan Trochinov. I'm the chair of the MFA Products of Design Department, where you are now. So we are really excited to have Matt Manos here today, who took a red eye to be here. So that's full commitment. And he has the best name ever, which I think I've referred to lots of times as his business name, verynice. And so everybody in the room knows that I remark and joke often about filtering for nice in this department. So you are the nicest. It's actually in your name. Also, I got an email 4 minutes ago from somebody who is looking for leads for work, and in the sentence writes, "I'm generally rather nice and also like other nice people." To which I responded, "I need your okay to read that sentence in the next 6 minutes because I'll be introducing Matt Manos and want to use it. I hope you get this email." And I did not get clearance. So that's anonymous. So there's that. So anyway, so I was looking at your biography, which is just completely ridiculous. It's hard to believe that anybody, particularly with just the number of years you have under your belt, could have accomplished all this much. I like the fact that you're calling yourself a neo-philanthropist. Matt's worked with UNICEF and Nations and Walt Disney Imagineering and Facebook and just all of these incredible organizations and brands. And then there's something else in here. Decks for parks I did not know about. I have a new interest in longboarding, so we're going to have to talk about that.
Yeah.
But then he does mention in the bio side projects.
That is my MacBook Pro.
This is his computer.
Oh, if you just touch the mouse pad, we're good. There we go.
Okay. So you mentioned side projects in your bio, and I have met more and more people, as I've also said to you, who really, in some sense, judge people or hire people based on their side projects. Even people like at Google, it's like, yeah, we don't even look at the resume. We look at their side projects. And if side projects are interesting, then they're interesting. And that seems very consistent with not only what you might believe, which I don't know, but certainly with how you've led your life. So that's pretty amazing. So this is a bit of a long introduction, but we're really excited to have you. So please welcome Matt Manos.
All right, thanks so much.
This is Kate, by the way.
And my wife Kate's in the audience.
She's crashing the talk. So we'll use this for Q&A.
Cool. Well, thanks again so much for having me, and happy to be here. I was telling Alan right before, it kind of feels like I'm in somebody's home because of the kitchen, too, in the background, which makes this just so much nicer than talking in a regular old conference room as well. But yeah, so I'm going to kind of throw several things at you, but in general, this is about being very nice, giving half, creating models of impact, and inventing the future. So I'm going to try to walk you guys through a little bit of my story, as well as some of these side projects that are going on, some of these new projects that are just wrapping up as well. And then hopefully we can have a little bit of a discussion about what you guys are doing, and we can use this time to help you out with your projects too, which would be great. So I always start my story with this number, which is $8 billion. And that is the amount of money that nonprofit organizations in the United States alone are spending every single year on people like me, on design and marketing professionals. And I don't know about you guys, but that number to me is very disturbing, because I like to imagine what the world would look like if they could have the same really important access to those great services without this hefty amount, right? So in my mind, if we could actually allow them to invest more in their cause, we might be able to make even more impact in the world. And again, design and marketing is really important. They need that. But maybe there's new models to make it more affordable or to lower the barrier to entry. And if we can do that, and if they can invest more in their cause, perhaps we can solve some of the world's most persistent problems, like hunger, like housing, water access, etc. The list kind of goes on. This is sort of where pro bono comes in. Pro bono is short for pro bono publico, which literally means for the good of the public. It got its start in the legal industry, actually in New York. And it soon trickled into a lot of other industries, especially the design industry, around the time when the ad council was emerging. You guys have seen a lot of like Smokey the Bear advertisements and so on. They would recruit a lot of designers and marketers to volunteer to create these public service announcements. And soon people started to really see the benefits of pro bono and see that it's really helpful for the world, but also it's very gratifying for yourself and for your own practice. I got my start as a pro bono practitioner when I was 16 years old. That's when I could do stuff like this. I used to skateboard competitively, so happy to give you longboard lessons, Alan, for sure. Although I've never been that great at longboarding because I'm strangely afraid of going down hills, but being upside down is no problem for me. Although, you know, I can only do this probably on like a 1-foot ramp at this point, but I try, right? So anyways, because I was competing as a skateboarder throughout high school and pretty much like maybe my first year of college, and that's when I stopped doing it competitively, I was always training, and this was in the Bay Area. I grew up in Silicon Valley. This park is in Sunnyvale, California. I would be there every Saturday, sometimes every Saturday and Sunday, and there'd always be kind of the regular crew of people that were hanging out and trying new stuff. But there was one weekend where I saw a man in a wheelchair in the bowl actually do a flip over one of the channels. And it completely blew my mind. This was pre-YouTube also, so it was before you saw really cool things all the time. So, you know, obviously I was intrigued. I wanted to approach him, wanted to introduce myself, just kind of learn what was going on. And I noticed that he wasn't alone. He was with a bunch of little kids who were also in wheelchairs. And it appeared as though he was teaching them basically how to do this. And it turned out that he was the founder of a nonprofit that at the time taught kids in wheelchairs how to participate in extreme sports. This was kind of mind-blowing to me. I had never met the founder of a nonprofit organization before. Growing up in the Silicon Valley, everyone and their mother literally is the founder of something. But I had never met the founder of a nonprofit. And that passion that really radiated from him was very inspiring to me. And I knew this was the kind of person, the kind of thing that I wanted to dedicate the rest of my life to. And so, you know, I didn't have any money really to donate to him aside from some allowance, you know, from doing random chores and whatnot. I also was not personally in a wheelchair, so I can't really teach someone in a wheelchair how to do things because I wouldn't even know how to do it. But I figured, you know, about like the week or two prior, I had gotten my first pirated copy of Photoshop from my godmother, who was studying art in Australia at the time. And I was starting to learn, you know, the really important design skills of kind of making your head really big or changing the color of your hair or, you know, the things that all of you did and maybe won't admit when you first got Photoshop. I figured, you know, why not put these incredible skills to good use and offered to design him some stickers. And that became my first pro bono project before I knew what pro bono was. It was my dad that told me what pro bono was after I did that because he's a lawyer. And again, in the legal industry, there's some really strong ties there. So flash forward just 3 years after that, when I was 19, I launched verynice from my college dorm room, basically. And it's now a global design strategy consultancy that gives half of its work away for free to nonprofit organizations. So still very much inspired by that moment at the skate park and really trying to figure out how can I make that an integral part of what we do as well. We work with all kinds of different clients. Half of them are nonprofits. The other half are really, really big nonprofits or startups or big businesses or mom and pop shops, et cetera. Really kind of all over the place, and that's something that makes us a little bit interesting. I'm going to talk a little bit about that later as well. When we originally launched, we focused exclusively on visual design, so especially brand identity design, website design, et cetera. And then over the last 4 or 5 years, we've really transitioned to balance that more visual work on the left with more strategic work on the right, as well as developing our own tools and resources that we can offer to our clients and to the world at large. So over the course of that time, what's been interesting is we kind of keep accumulating more and more services that we offer. So instead of replacing services, we just kind of keep stacking it on. And they really span these 4 categories of visual communication. So again, kind of where we started, what you might think of a very traditional graphic design work, to digital product design, so entering that UX, UI space, design strategy, which is a huge section of what we do now around business design, brand strategy, marketing strategy, et cetera. And then even strategic foresight, so really looking at long-term implications of things for our clients, researching trends, et cetera. Our work is equally as diverse. This is just kind of a few quick ones to go through. This was a painting that we had commissioned from a good friend of mine, Dan Everett. He's the one that's positioned in the right image right there. His mom lived in a home that was really affected by fracking issues. And at the time, we were working with NRDC on their Demand Clean Power campaign, which was all about fracking and the Keystone XL pipeline, et cetera. And we thought, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we got an artist that's been sort of touched by this cause to participate in this somehow? So we locked him in a room for 24 hours, him and myself and a filmmaker, and we basically videoed the process of him creating a painting that was inspired by that experience that he and his mom had. And so the result was this really weird thing on the left, which I love, that kind of depicts like an upper world and a lower world as well. And they ended up, having this kind of in their collection and was part of a bigger campaign that we did. Also branding. So Katie, my wife's in the audience. She did the branding for this project with us called the Pasadena Museum of California Art. If any of you are ever in California, this is one of my favorite museums personally, because it focuses exclusively on California artists and themes and images that are inspired by California in general. It's actually really small, so it almost has the feeling of a gallery, and equally it rotates through exhibits all of the time. And so as a result, what we did with the branding and the identity is we had the letters, the image that's filling those letters change with every new exhibit that they have. So it's a dynamic identity. And we basically instruct the museum to take a close-up image of whatever the primary piece is in the new show, and that essentially becomes the logo. So it's been really fun. We did this maybe 2 years ago at this point, or almost, and watching them kind of take that on and evolve it over time and seeing it constantly change has been really gratifying. I mentioned we do digital products too. This was with the Keep a Breast Foundation that a lot of you might know from the I Love Boobies bracelets that they make. So they focus on breast cancer prevention, but at a really, really young age. So they target high school men and women essentially. And they wanted to create an app, and they wanted it to be something that was actually useful and that actually contributed to their mission. So we developed this, which is essentially a self-check reminder. So you'll every month get a text message that reminds you to perform a self-check exam for breast cancer. And it's basically a push notification. It's really simple, but when you accept it, it gives you the step-by-step guide of how to do it. And really helped them kind of expand their reach through an app design, which is something that I enjoyed about it. A lot of the times you're approached to do an app because an app is cool, but this is something that actually contributed to their mission and actually helped them make even more impact through their education work. This is another project that we did. This is an example of when a client kind of reaches out and says, hey, we have 2 Jumbotrons, can you do something on them? You gotta kind of grab that opportunity because you don't normally get that much lenience really. And this was with the Culver Center of the Arts. This museum is positioned directly across from the city of Riverside's City Hall. And Riverside is in Southern California. It's kind of eastern Southern California. And around this time, they were facing a lot of foreclosed homes, a lot of empty storefronts, et cetera. And there's just kind of this sense of what should we do, right? How can we kind of reimagine Riverside? And so that's the name of this project. Also around this time, I was living in Pasadena, and for years there was a McDonald's there, and that McDonald's got boarded up. And I remember I got really excited for a moment thinking, hey, is this going to actually be something new, like something different that's not McDonald's? And then after about a year of construction, they took the wood down and it was just a nicer McDonald's. And I remember thinking, whoa, what if what shows up on our streets could be democratized in some way? What if the communities could help pick what fills these storefronts when there's opportunities? So this tried to sort of imagine that potential future where people would tweet using the hashtag #ReimagineRiverside ideas of things they'd like to see in their community. and basically they would show up on these jumbotrons. What was nice about it being positioned directly across from City Hall is that kind of dialogue that was taking place. But also, what I loved is that some of the ideas that were submitted were really kind of emotional and serious, and others were just really playful, you know? And so it had this really human vibe to it in the sense of that participation, which made it so special. We also launched a Civic Innovation Fellowship position with the City of Los Angeles. And the big goal with that, like some of you might know, LA and a lot of cities, they have these open data initiatives where they're trying to make government data more accessible to entrepreneurs or to anybody. And the big problem with that is it tends to look like endless Excel sheets. So it's really hard to be relatable. And one way that we thought it could go and what this fellowship position did was basically trying to geomap that data to at least make it relatable to us and literally where we are in our community. So that went on for about a year, and the fellow made maybe 20 or 30 of these different diagrams, which was really, really awesome experience for them. We also still, like I mentioned, do more traditional graphic design work. So this is some editorial design and infographic design for the Downtown Women's Center, which is in Skid Row in downtown Los Angeles. Some of our team went with the Downtown Women's Center to survey basically the homeless women living there on what their needs are. And this publication is really great because it's shared with all organizations that are supporting this cause. So it becomes a resource for everybody to kind of share in, and design and visual communication became a really great way to make that very tangible for people. Decks for Parks, you mentioned that. That was a side project of mine. I wanted to start a skateboard company that gave half of its proceeds to help build skate parks. So we made this as a prototype, and there was a skateboard shop in San Francisco that ended up adopting it and selling it for a while to raise some money with it as well. What I like about this project is it was something I really wanted to do, but then ultimately realized I couldn't kind of manage that. And so instead of giving up, you know, trying to find somebody that would be interested in it became a really good path for this so that it could actually live on as well. We do a lot of workshops. This is one where I'm popping a balloon. Another recent project that was really fun. This was a collaboration with Google, where we worked with them to rebrand and do some product development for an app called Billion Acts. This was short for 1 billion acts of peace. And essentially it's a portal for people to find opportunities to just do nice things in their community, to commit some kinds of acts of peace. That can be as big as housing a homeless person, or it could be as small as picking up some trash. But these acts of peace are logged here. And Peace Jam, who's the organization that runs it, they've actually been nominated for multiple Nobel Peace Prize because of the projects they do. And this was one of those that sparked a nomination. So being a part of something, you know, that could have that kind of recognition was really, really amazing. So all of this work and more, actually as of this week, we finished 1,000 pro bono projects. So it's a huge milestone for us. And all of that has totaled up to a gift of over $6 million worth of services since we've launched. And this is a number that I'm really proud of. You know, it's a lot more than I ever thought we would be able to do, and it's still growing, right? But it's really not enough. And what I mean by that, when you compare it to that $8 billion figure that I shared at the very beginning, that's something that's spent every single year, right? And our 6.25, it took us almost a decade to do that. And so clearly something's not adding up, right? We are not going to be able to alone tackle this issue. If our mission is to help nonprofit organizations save valuable resources so they can invest more in their cause, we kind of can't do this on our own anymore. And so this realization came around 2012, I think right when I had met you, Alan, as well. And at first it was a little bit of a point of depression, and then it was a really cool opportunity because I realized, well, what we have to do is make our model go from something that's unique to something that's standard. And that sparked an interest in actually open sourcing verynice's business model, our give half model. That started with a lot of kind of sketches, illustrations, writing, and then it ended up in a book that's in its second edition. now called How to Give Half of Your Work Away for Free, and it's essentially our business plan and our business model, open for anybody to download at any price that they want, or to purchase the hard copy as well. So this is obviously a dog-friendly book also. That's my dog Charlie. Perfect kind of like tongue moment right there for that photo capture as well. And what I've spent a lot of my time doing, kind of like I'm doing right now, is going around talking to people and tricking them into doing pro bono work, basically, and telling them that pro bono is awesome, and spreading this kind of message. And the result has been that thousands of practitioners now are giving their work away for free, inspired by these tools that we've created. And there's even some that are giving half as well, which is really kind of a bar that we tried to set. But we're surprised that about a dozen or so of these give half companies now exist all around the globe. So why are they doing this? It turns out that there are benefits to pro bono work. Some of these I found sort of along the way by accident, and some of which you might actually read about. There's been more and more studies around this lately. One is karma, of course. So that's one scientific benefit of pro bono. If you help people out, that the universe will hopefully help you out, right? Another that's a little bit more strategic is networking. Something that really surprised me is the majority of the nonprofits we're working with, they either have no paid staff, so everyone's volunteer, or they have very, very few. And that means that they all have day jobs elsewhere. And so those day jobs have become referrals for us. That's actually been a big source for a lot of our paid work. Because you're working with somebody, you're proving that you're good at what you do, they're going to want to work with you in this other context as well. Another opportunity with networking with some of the bigger organizations that we work with, a lot of their board of directors are CEOs at really big companies, and that's how we get our foot in the door with a lot of the kind of bigger brands that we work with. That's how we got hooked up with Disney Imagineering, actually, was through helping a nonprofit that the person that was working in Imagineering was on the board of. So these connections are really, really helpful, and it's a good way to kind of spread the good vibes and help each other out as well. A third one is education. I mentioned that we kind of went from this visual design space to this more design strategy space. That really was only possible because we asked various nonprofits if we could try stuff with them, right? No risk because we weren't charging them. The risk was entirely on us because they might choose not to use it. But all of a sudden we were accumulating the proof that we could write a business plan or create an app, or anything that we wanted to do but we didn't really have that proof or that client list behind. We all of a sudden were able to equip ourselves with. So that's been really, really helpful. So this is progress. People are out there, they're doing pro bono work. We're doing great. That's awesome. But it really is just the beginning, right? And what I mean by that, with Give Half, what's kind of interesting, the moment we open sourced it, we really did go from unique to not standard yet, but unique to less unique. And so this big question of, well, what is our value proposition? What makes Very Nice unique now, if everything that we're doing is kind of open to everybody else, came up. And it became a really interesting question to think through. And we started to try to think, okay, well, how is it that we are, not just another design studio, right? There's probably hundreds of thousands of them. And what we realized is this Give Half model gave us a really unique position where we had feet kind of equally in the private and the social sector. And so as a result, we're able to really take some best practices from one sector and introduce it to another and vice versa. And also had a really good sense of the trends that were happening in both of those sectors, which became something that was one of our real true values to the people that we work with. And so Give Half, was one of those models. But really what we realize is it's kind of one of potentially hundreds of models that are out there that we could share with people, that we could open up to people, et cetera. And so that became a project called Models of Impact that began as a research project of trying to collect as many of these models as possible, map them out, see who's using them, how do they work, how are they related to one another, how are they different than one another, et cetera. And it turned into a series of infographics that we developed of kind of cross-axes that were really trying to investigate these. across the product space, the service space, and just revenue models in general. And then we kind of had all of this stuff and didn't really know what to do with it. You know, it was kind of fun to look at, and we put it online, and a lot of people were looking at it. But something that, you know, I'm passionate about is education and actually having people engage with the materials as well. But before I get into that, some examples of just these innovative models. One is Homeboy Industries. Has anybody heard of them? So they're in LA. Whenever you say, has anybody heard of them, and you're in LA, everybody raises their hand. They're a really amazing organization. They're one of the largest, if not the largest, gang intervention organizations in the US. And they are based maybe like, what, a mile from our office. So they're in Chinatown of downtown Los Angeles. And what many of you might know is once you've been in jail or if you have a bad record, it's pretty hard to get a job. And so they actually launched a series of social enterprises under their nonprofit umbrella that they then hire these formerly incarcerated people or people that are transitioning out of gangs to run and to actually be employed by. So this is one example of a bakery, but they also have a silk screening company, a tattoo removal business, all kinds of things. Another cool model is the pay what you want model, which Radiohead really popularized when they came out with In Rainbows. This was in, I think, 2005 or 2006. It's a model that I really like as well. We use it for models of impact also. But basically, they came out with this really at the height of the music industry kind of declining. You know, people were pirating everything left and right. People weren't seeing the value of music. Sales were going down, et cetera. And so what they decided is instead of trying to go the traditional route, what if we make a website where people can pay whatever they want, even if it's $0 to download our music? And what they found is that their kind of net profit was actually higher than when they went the traditional route. So something about that trust in that exchange between a consumer and a provider of goods or services turned out to be a really smart model, and more companies are using this now. Another model is the product for service model. So a lot of you have probably heard of 1 for 1, which is like Tom's Shoes, where you buy a pair of shoes and they donate a pair of shoes. The problem with that model from a lot of critics is that it assumes that somebody else wants exactly what you want. That's kind of a very American way of doing social impact stuff in general. You know, you fly to Africa and throw crayons at somebody and then get out of there. But with Listen headphones, it's kind of a nice revision where they're not assuming that kids want hipster headphones, right? Instead, they're trying to think, well, okay, this is what the customer wants. Now, what could we give that's kind of attached to our story? And in their case, they donate hearing aids for every pair of headphones that are purchased. So it's a really beautiful connection between music and what they found in their field research was actually a need in the communities that they wanted to help. So it's called product for service. It's when a product enables a service. This is another kind of trending startup right now. They're called Meathead Movers. And basically, they are student athletes that get hired to move your stuff when you're moving. So they're really good at picking things up and moving them places. But you know, they were thinking, well, what kind of impact could we create? And kind of like Listen headphones, what kind of impact could we create, but that is really playing to our core competency? And in this case, it's the ability to move things, right? So they actually do a small percentage of their moves for free for victims of domestic violence. So really, again, like really kind of emotional, you know, give back program that they have that really plays to their strengths. So it feels very authentic as well. You all have heard of the sharing economy, obviously, but this is kind of a funny magazine cover. Strangers crashed my car, ate my food, and wore my pants. Tales from the sharing economy. This is arguably one of the biggest new impact models of our generation, at least. And the reason is because it's enabling a couple of things with all of the controversies that it's brought. One is this kind of gig economy and really growing that freelance workforce and allowing people to take on really kind of micro gigs that can support them while they pursue other things like maybe music or the arts or whatever it might be. The other is the real impact of promoting a lifestyle where we all own less stuff. which things like owning cars, it's not really part of the New York culture necessarily, but in LA, this is already having a pretty profound impact. And the decrease in DUI-related accidents as well because of this. So it's really something to kind of keep an eye out for. It's growing like crazy. So like I mentioned, we collected all this stuff. We ended up writing up a glossary that defined over 100 of these models, put it online, et cetera, and started just to be interested, well, how can people engage with it in a workshop kind of setting? So we started prototyping that and eventually came to a toolkit, really a curriculum that we were happy with, that we were willing to kind of put online and share with people to have them download and use in the classroom or at work or wherever it might be. And it's being used in 75 countries, so all over the place people are doing these models of impact workshops to develop their own business model ideas, kind of like those ones that I showed you. And really the basis of it is what we believe a business model is. A lot of the times when you ask somebody what a business model is, I've found that they tell you this half of it, which is the revenue model, a sustainable way of making money, basically. But what we found with the people we're working with is that it really requires a balance of both of these things, an impact model and a revenue model. So an impact model being a sustainable way of making the impact that you're trying to achieve. That doesn't have to be social impact necessarily. That could be environmental impact. That could even be personal impact. You know, the idea of kind of what is your why, right, or what's your purpose. Balancing those two things, we found, results in a great business model. The toolkit itself has 4 different steps: learn, invent, program, and report, and basically takes you through an educational process of just what models are out there, then how can you make something new, and then how can you actually kind of plan that new thing, and then report, how can you get feedback on it. That's a very basic gist of it. But what makes it really fun to me is the invent phase. And that's because in the invent phase, randomization is really critical to our process. So much so that we actually use dice. We use polyhedral dice like you would find in Dungeons and Dragons or anything like that. And it sounds kind of crazy, but it really works. The reason why randomization is great, especially with business models and especially with creative people, is these are things that are kind of scary, right? Like designing a business model, it's kind of scary or it's kind of boring. And the moment that you are facing something that's kind of scary or boring, you go to the first thing you've heard of. But by doing so, you might have missed out on hundreds of other opportunities. So when you randomize it, you kind of have no choice. You roll the dice and you have to go with that combination of impact model, revenue model, or other factors in general that kind of get thrown into the mix. And you just have to play it out and see what would happen. So that's where we've seen some success with it. To give you guys just kind of a quick example, if I were to have a 6-sided die right now, I would roll that die 3 times, and that would give me 1 item from each of these 3 lists. The other factors are, in this case, just things that interest me in general. But the impact models and revenue models are taken straight from our glossary. So if I rolled 3 times, you know, maybe I'll get lava lamps, recycle, and in-app purchases. And now I would have to come up with a business concept that connects all 3 of those things. So maybe this is a lava lamp that has an app attached to it where I can buy different colors or sounds that come out of it, and maybe it's made in a sustainable, upcycled manner, right? So that's just kind of a real quick example of trying to go through this thought exercise. After you do that, we have you go through an actual business planning process to make it really tangible also. So we've done this in educational settings, kind of incorporating into various curriculum at different schools, for corporate clients as well, for nonprofit organizations. With Architecture for Humanity, many of you might have heard they went bankrupt, and they actually respawned as Open Architecture Collaborative, and we helped them do that through this toolkit as well. So helping them see through several models that they could have, because ultimately Architecture for Humanity went bankrupt because of a lack of a business model. So how can we have new opportunities to explore? This is me teaching it to the city of West Hollywood as well. So we've been starting to get this into the public sector also, around how they can use the kind of models that are commonplace in the social and private sector and use them to create new initiatives within government as well. And beginning of this year, I did something really cool where I went to Russia to teach this to a group of Russian entrepreneurs and to film an online course as well that kind of made it available in Russian. So somebody pointed out to me that I have unlocked the life goal of having a video with Russian subtitles. So that's pretty cool. And a lot of this randomization, it actually comes from less practical places. And I wanted to share this with you guys because, not that this wasn't practical, but it wasn't in a corporate setting, right? Because you guys are in the middle of going through your MFA, and this directly relates to what I was doing when I was at school in Art Center. I was really interested in the idea of generative business or serendipitous business. And the way that that started, I went on a walk, and I basically came up with some rules. I walked 100 steps. I took a picture of the first non-living thing that I saw, and that would be my product. Then I walked another 100 steps. I took a picture of the first living thing that I saw, and that would be my market or my audience. And then I walked another 100 steps, and I took a picture of the space that I was in, and that would be my industry or my environment. So this business is park benches for dogs at railroad stations. And you can imagine, if you actually had to, as product designers, design that park bench for that dog at a railroad station, what would it look like? It's a really kind of interesting jumping off point. Then I thought, oh, what if it's not a walk, but it's kind of like a set of playing cards? Those are kind of hip these days. So I made a card game, version of it as well, where people would deal these 3 factors randomly, and they would have to fill out a business plan, a very simple business plan template to kind of populate their idea. Then I thought, well, what if it's more of like a community workshop where people are coming together? So I prototyped this in the city of Merced with a bunch of different people that were living there and working there. And then thought, what if it gets a little less human and as actually kind of a little bit more machine generated? So this was a workshop called Box and Button, where basically students at Art Center, they'd press a button that would then generate some factors on a screen that they would then have to come up with a business concept for. So it just gets a little more technological than the card game did. And then I thought, well, what if I take the human out of it completely? So I had an algorithm that wrote 1,000 business plans, basically, that just kind of spit them out. Some of them are real like gibberish, some are kind of plausible, and some are oddly offensive. But I shipped all of them to the top venture capital firms in Silicon Valley. That project was called For Your Consideration, and didn't get a single response, but maybe they will someday. So all of that was documented in a show that kind of showed this process. And it's funny, right? You can see how it directly correlates to what I'm doing now with models of impact. So with you guys, hopefully you can find that connecting point to that project that you're doing and bring it into your practice as well. It's been a huge help for me. The last thing that I wanted to do, I just released my second book, which is called Toward a Preemptive Social Enterprise. And a big part of it, or something that I'm excited about it, is a manifesto. So I wanted to read that to you guys. But what I want to just say about this, I was talking about how one of the values we've found from verynice is that we have our feet in both worlds, right? Private and social. And so we can kind of take some things from one, give it to the other. What we really realized about the social sector is that they're often born out of a state of emergency or out of a kind of reaction to some terrible thing that already happened, versus in the private sector, they become really motivated to start something new based off of something kind of imaginary, like a future trend or an emerging technology or whatever it might be. And there was kind of this question of, well, hey, why is that happening? Why is it that way? Could we teach the social sector some of those kind of strategic foresight tools to get them to be more preemptive, and what would that actually allow us? So I'm going to read it. And hopefully you guys like it. It's the first time I've ever read it out loud to people. So, Toward a Preemptive Social Enterprise. Social entrepreneurship is a field defined by reaction. Social enterprise is built around the art of reacting to something that has already happened. This is always a reaction to something terrible, and this reaction represents the heart and soul of an organization's core values. Could a nonprofit organization exist if not for something terrible? No. Could a social business exist if not for something having gone awry? No. Could a venture-backed startup exist if not for something terrible? Yes. In the fields of business peripheral to social enterprise, innovation in times of great privilege or convenience is encouraged and incubated. The encouragement to think preemptively is among the key differentiators between a social enterprise and a traditional enterprise. The entire premise of social enterprise relies on reaction. Ours is a field of business that is built upon the failure of a natural or societal system. Ours is not a field that profits from the contemplation of the signals of failures that have yet to exist. Social entrepreneurs are inspired into action by the trauma of the present, and innovation is only born out of an existing state of emergency. Social entrepreneurs perceive trauma as permission to innovate. This is not a responsible assumption. By relying on trauma to be our leading incubation tactic for new social enterprises, we are distracting our industry from its unique potential to go far beyond the opportunity of yesterday's catastrophe. While profit-minded enterprise finds success on the basis of balancing reaction and preemption, the conscious-minded enterprise misses out by exclusively investing its energy into the art of reaction. Reaction is necessary, but reaction can no longer be revered as the holy grail or singular expectation of the new social entrepreneur. Social enterprise has failed to encourage a discipline that can deviate from the trauma of the present, and these strict expectations have failed to encourage a diverse set of theories and initiatives centered around a trauma that has yet to exist. The new social entrepreneur must also be preemptive. The preemptive social entrepreneur understands a new suite of previously unimagined problems, as well as the next evolutions for the present day's most persistent social and environmental issues. The next wave of social entrepreneurs must include a community of those who choose to focus on the future. These are innovators who refuse to wait for the bomb to explode. The preemptive social entrepreneur imagines a future that is bespoke, a future that is ideal. The preemptive social entrepreneur works backwards from the ideal. The preemptive social entrepreneur is a visionary and concerns themselves with the study of systemic interventions. They imagine implications, they author scenarios, they plan strategically. The preemptive social entrepreneur balances theory and practice, and the preemptive social entrepreneur is not necessarily a business owner. We mustn't all focus on cleaning beaches. We mustn't all focus on feeding the poor. We mustn't all focus on housing the homeless. We mustn't all focus on curing diseases. We mustn't all focus on donating goods and services. The old social entrepreneur is fueled by this kind of reaction. Of course, social entrepreneurs must be engaged with the trauma of the present, but the preemptive social entrepreneur must also consider the trauma of the future. The new social entrepreneur will strike a balance between reaction and preemption, and the new social entrepreneur asks, what if? The new social entrepreneur is a facilitator of change. The next generation of social enterprise must welcome the preemptive social entrepreneur. The preemptive social entrepreneur is the new social entrepreneur. Preemption and reaction, preemptive and reactive, reaction to the preemption. Welcome the new social entrepreneur. We need you. We're glad you're here. All right, and with that, these are some links to stuff that I do. I'd be happy to take questions, and the first 3 people that ask questions get a copy of the new book. Yeah. Hi.
And the fourth one gets it signed.
Yes. Gets a future signature.
Signature from?
Signature that doesn't exist yet.
This is awesome and very inspiring, and thank you for reading it to us.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I'm really curious about the way that you've thought about developing your employees at your company, and how you think about kind of internal, within a business model, how does the people operation piece of it work, and how do you think about creating spaces that can be the most creative and kind of balance the different parts of a person?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's something I've been thinking more and more about as we've kind of grown as a team as well. One of the things that I did originally when we were growing was it wasn't in a very strategic manner. It was very reactive, actually, instead of preemptive, you could say. And now, my focus with growth is have one person that is really great at one of our core competencies. And once we fill all of those slots, we kind of have the team that we need. And that's not necessarily, a massive company. It doesn't really have to be. We also work a lot with people remotely, too, which is kind of another cool opportunity. But in terms of how we can really grow the team kind of intellectually, involving them in these kinds of internal initiatives that we're doing more and more of those lately. And next year, we're going to kind of announce another really big one, kind of at the scale of models of impact, that the team doesn't know about yet, but I want to kind of co-author it with them. So getting them involved in that so that they're balancing, being kind of challenged in the client work, but also having that room to do their own thing a little bit too, is definitely a direction that I want to go in. We're doing a retreat at the end of the year, and one of our art director wanted to do a workshop on designing kites. So we're letting her do that. So it's like, just trying to kind of hear people out with things that they're excited about. So now we're all going to make kites in Palm Springs. So that's great. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm curious about this idea of preemption, and for instance, thank you for that, by the way. For instance, the social side of IDEO.org, one of the ways that they're able to really understand the kind of design that people who need the design might need is to do a lot of design research and field work and that kind of stuff. So I'm curious how you think, if you're trying to preempt something and you don't know yet, if somebody hasn't been impacted by something and it's not reactionary, how do you start to try to research and develop a solution for something that's there? I love the idea of that, but I'm trying to think through the logistics of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the things that I think's interesting to note is that there's a whole field called strategic foresight. And this is one that I was introduced to by a colleague of mine, 5 or 6 years ago, and really blew my mind when I learned about it, because what it taught me is that there actually are futurists, like that's an actual thing. It's not a crystal ball necessarily, like you might imagine. They have actual strategic methods that they use. They never say to predict the future, but to invent it or to kind of at least tango with it a bit. And so one of those tactics is called the archetypes of the future. And that is a tactic where you take an existing issue, right? It could be something that you gather from that design research work that you do, and then you run it through 4 different filters. One is a transformation scenario. So that's a scenario of the future where you can imagine like the Jetsons, like everything's going great. We've got everything socially, economically, politically, and whatnot. So what does your idea look like under that scenario? Then you run it through one called growth, where it's positive, but it's not transformational, right? But things are still possible. Things are growing. There's some kind of steady growth. It's not like a huge spike. And then there's the 2 that are sometimes fun and sad. One is collapse, which is that kind of apocalyptic scene. So what happens to your idea when all of A, B, C, D, E, F goes wrong? And then there's constraint, where that's the 4th archetype, where literally nothing changes. So you have to be incredibly resourceful. So that's just one of a ton of different tactics that are out there. And again, the goal of a preemptive entrepreneur from my perspective wouldn't be to tell the future or to predict it, but to just create the space for conversation about that. Because very often nonprofits, they're kind of running on a treadmill because of funding issues or whatever it might be. And so they're not reserving the time to think about this, mainly because they think that it's a huge project, but it's actually just a thought exercise at the bare minimum. And so that's kind of what I'm hoping to spark in some people. Yeah. Yeah.
First of all, thank you. Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming and talking to us. It's really refreshing to get this perspective. I am wondering about how do you strike the balance of the value of pro bono work, which, I mean, I'm convinced that this is worth doing.
I tricked you.
You
Nice.
didn't have to trick me. I was there already. But I will say that, like, something that I think about a lot, I come from a background in theater, and I have a lot of friends who work in like the NGO sector. And I think that there's an expectation that when people are doing something that they care deeply about and feel is important, that they don't need to get paid. So the question's in there somewhere. You know, like
how do you maintain your sense of value?
Well, and how do you maintain your, you know, you need money to live. So how does that balance with like getting paid and being able to even continue to do the work, or like not getting burnt out because you're taking on so many projects to sustain the pro bono work? Yeah,
totally. So I have a couple answers. One, I think, is around the value, because this is something that we figured out that really worked for us. Because originally we were taking on pro bono work and doing it, and then, you know, all of the bad things that you hear about pro bono were happening to us. Like, a project went on for 2 years and we couldn't like break up with it, right? The scope went crazy, all of that kind of stuff. And then what I realized is, hey, you know, with our paid clients, that doesn't happen. How come? Oh, it's because we have an agreement. And so we came up with this idea of having pro bono agreements where there's no money, right? It says $0. Or if it's a partial pro bono, it says what the market rate would be and shows the discount. And then it lists out the scope and the time frame, and both parties sign that. And magically, there's not been an issue since of kind of overstepping boundaries. Again, even though it's not a financial exchange necessarily, just that act of kind of that commitment has really helped. The other nice thing I mentioned, we get a lot of our referrals from pro bono clients. Well, you could imagine that one potential nightmare would be that we get a referral that says, oh yeah, these guys are great and they do it for free all the time, you know? But these contracts actually show what that market rate would have been. So they know when they're kind of pitching us to others, oh yeah, that would have cost this, but we were lucky enough to get it for free because of our nonprofit status and whatnot. So that's kind of that answer. And then with the balance, it's really about just being really strict. So if we're at 50-50, we're not even looking at the applications that are coming in for new pro bono work. So it's kind of been about learning how to just stay really strict to that balance. And in terms of having more bandwidth to be able to cover all of that, really opening up our doors to volunteers to help us out. Something I didn't mention, we have almost 500 volunteers that we team up with all over the place when we're kind of low on resources, because we have a small team. We fluctuate probably between like 12 and 15 people. So it's not a huge company, but we tap into this network to help us out, you know, on a kind of per project basis, which has helped us be able to afford that pro bono work as well. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Thank you. I was wondering about the question of like measuring impact, because I took the class in my undergrad called social entrepreneurship, and the question always came up was like, how are we measuring the impact of like the models that you're creating? And like, is there a way you actually approach that?
Yeah, so that's a real hot topic for sure. And I would say no one really knows exactly how to do it right yet. You know, I think everybody's still trying to figure it out, because this is a field that's still pretty new relatively now. But what I've found is a lot of times the impact measurement, it's easy to accidentally just do that for yourself. So what I mean by that is like for your marketing purposes. Like, it'd be easy for us to just say, hey, look, you know, we did 1,000 projects and it's worth over $6 million, and that's where we stop with measuring. But you have to remember that the measurement's not just for you, it's also for the client. And so one of the things that we started doing whenever we would offer a client a pro bono service, we would ask them, what did saving that money allow you to do? A lot of the times that doesn't work, because in some cases it allowed them to do nothing since there was just no money whatsoever. But in some cases, it did. You know, like we worked with 826 Los Angeles. They're kind of a national organization, and they told us, you know, they were able to do X amount more tutoring sessions and X amount more books because of the work we did. Because they had that budgeted, and then they all of a sudden didn't have to pay for it, so they actually could move their money around. So we hear things like that, and trying to get that feedback from clients has been the best thing that I've found. And for us, you know, I keep a log of what causes we're serving the most, so that I know like what are we really kind of high on, what are we low on. So right now, healthcare and education are our two biggest, and the environment's one of our lowest. And so by measuring that, I know that we should be accepting more environmental causes to help out in the future, to kind of balance it out. So hopefully that helps. You know, it's not really one way to do it for everybody. That's what I've found just talking to people. You kind of have to see what works for you for your own benefit, and remembering that it has to benefit the client too. Yeah.
The DSI, the Design for Social Innovation department downstairs, is putting together an entire full-day conference on measurement.
Awesome.
Coming up soon, so you should be at that if you're interested.
Yeah, you guys should go, because that would be very cutting edge. There's people are doing it great, but there's not a consensus at all. So that's a real fresh conversation. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
Well,
you have the
thanks
mic.
for coming. I do. I'm going to ask you a real question this time.
All right.
So you mentioned something that really sparked my interest, because I've done a little pro bono work in the past myself, and you said that when people have to do something that's scary or boring, they tend to do the first thing they think of. Mm-hmm. But I imagine that you've probably encountered some scary and boring stuff while you're trying new things in your business. How do you keep it from getting you down?
Yeah, wow, good question. Well, a lot of the times it's by trying to do multiple angles on it. So if we come to a solution that was kind of boring, I mean, the first thing is try to get excited about it, because if it's a solution, that's kind of exciting, right? You help someone out, even if it's not the coolest way to go about it. I always try to see the positive in it. You know, sometimes we'll have a project that's just not, you know, we're probably not going to want to put it on our portfolio. That happens, of course, you know, but that doesn't mean that we were bummed about it because the client was happy and it made some kind of impact. So trying to see some good in it, kind of like with the way I answered the impact measurement question, see it from the client's eyes too. I've found, you know, we've done so many projects, right, that projects in general, you could easily have them be less and less exciting over the years. But the moment that you start doing that, you kind of have to snap out of it and remember that for that client, this was their first time ever doing something like this, and they're going to remember it forever, you know? And so you see it from their perspective, and you get that excitement, I feel like. Also, by doing a lot of projects at once and having side projects, like Alan alluded to, that, I mean, to me, that's how you kind of keep it fresh. I even do side projects outside of Very Nice. I have to, you know, for my sanity. I have an Instagram called The Dumpster Decipher, where I go around, I take pictures of tags on dumpsters, and I turn them into poetry. So it has nothing to do with social impact whatsoever. I mean, I could connect it somehow, but I'd be kind of lying to you, you know? I just want to do it. And so finding that is another way to keep things fresh too, no matter how weird it is, even if it's just for yourself. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for coming. This was really inspiring, as
awesome.
Many of my classmates have said. I'm wondering to what extent your social and environmental values and goals translate into the private sector as well. Do you ever integrate those, and how do you get those clients on board?
Yeah, good question. So in the beginning, it was much harder to, because we were still kind of establishing a brand for ourselves and so on. But one way to answer that, what I've noticed, a lot of people ask me, you know, oh, do you ever have, you know, like BP reach out, right? Or somebody that's just not doing so great. And what will you say to them? Will you turn them down or what? And the nice thing is, because of the brand is so much in this do-good space, those kind of people that don't care about that really just don't reach out to us, I've found, because it's not going to be a good fit to them. Or they see it and they're like, why do you give half? I don't get it. You know, I don't want to talk to you. And we'd just rather not talk to them anyways. So that's one kind of unhelpful answer, I would say, is Well, helpful and unhelpful, because it means that by really, being loud about your brand and what you care about, the right people will find you. I've found that's almost always the case, especially the moment you find a couple of them, because those lead to referrals of other like-minded people too. But when it comes to the private sector, we've been having more people coming to us that are in the private sector but are kind of blurring those lines like we are too. Models of Impact has really helped us in capturing more of those kinds of people, for sure. So that's been a huge value. It started as a side project, right, that was kind of just a research thing, and it's really actually been transformative for helping us find those right clients, get them excited about it. The other thing, if you ever have naysayers, or I just call them high-hanging fruit, they're really easy to jump on board when they see that someone else similar to them has done it and succeeded. That's the best thing you can do, is just throw a case study at them. Like, hey, such and such person donated this thing and that grew their social media presence by X amount. That even those kind of little facts, which are good for you to collect anyways, to be kind of on top of it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll just project.
Okay.
This is sort of a corollary or tactical follow-up to Karen's question earlier about finding balance.
Yeah.
But half is such an awesome and lofty objective, and I'm sure also part of this is probably answered in your first book. But I guess my first question is just how do you measure half? Is it quantity of active projects, quantity of completed projects over a year, hours worked? How do you choose to measure that? And maybe what are the challenges associated with that? And then I guess you're partially honest, but how do you seek that balance, and how do you make that work?
Yeah. So in terms of how we're measuring it, it's funny because it could be in a lot of ways. You mentioned several of them, right? For us, it's never been based on a backlog. It's always been based off of right now at this exact moment, and we don't measure it necessarily by. I don't know if we don't necessarily measure it by time either, just literally by project. And so as a result, some projects they're done in a week, some they're done in a few years. And I have a Trello board. I don't know if you guys have used that, but it's just kind of like a glorified to-do list. And I have one list of the pro bono ones, one list of the for-profit ones, and that's how I monitor it, to be honest. So it's always at that exact moment. An easier way to go about it would be a historical balance of 50-50. That would be easier. It's pretty aggressive to say at any given moment we're giving half, but that's just kind of the bar that we set for ourselves, and we make it work a lot of the times because of these volunteers that we get involved in it. So you can imagine, it gives a small company the bandwidth of kind of a big company, if need be, or by scheduling the projects in the right way. The pro bono projects tend to have a little bit more leniency on due date. We have the contract, so we commit to it, but they tend to not say, oh, we need it yesterday, like everybody else does. So hopefully that answers that a little bit. Yeah. Yeah.
I think I would like to contradict a little bit. Are you really balancing, or is this just the way you're living your life? I mean, you said it yourself, one of the goals is to normalize this. When I think about people giving up on work-life balance,
yeah, that's a good point.
People are happier because they don't have to balance anymore.
Yeah.
This is how I live my life.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm more active on social media, and sometimes I don't touch stuff my Facebook kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I wonder, I don't know if the point is to encourage people to rebalance or to choose how they're going to be in the world. I would love it to be the second one.
Yeah.
So you've been living this life for a long time. And I think that there was a point in your career where you needed to message this out.
Yeah.
And maybe there will always be that requirement.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering if you can confirm my suspicion that this is not how you actually spend your time thinking.
Right. No, yeah. You're right. Well, what's interesting is we literally balance it because of having that public commitment, basically. But I think, like you said, it really is just a way of living, And what I realized pretty quickly, yeah, give as much as you take, or even as much as you can in some cases. I used to be a lot more kind of harsh in my perspective, saying, oh, everybody has to give half, you know, but now it's a little bit more around the lines of everybody should set the bar that they think they can reach, but it just should be a priority. Why we landed on 50% was mainly symbolically, because the moment that you do something more with more than half of your time, it's all of a sudden not an extracurricular activity. It's really integrated into your life, like you said. And so setting that bar has been helpful in maybe finding that way of life, and it might not be necessary to measure it forever. It's possible. Yeah. Yeah, I like that a lot. Yeah.
I know that AIGA for a long time on their job board has also listed pro bono work and has, you know, a couple of sentences about the benefits of pro bono work, especially for people starting out. And I'm wondering, since you have an overflow of clients that tend to want pro bono work, and you seem to be more articulate in your benefits of pro bono work, if you have, or if you thought of considering pairing up with them, because they're such a major funnel and have cast such a wide net with people.
Yeah, yeah.
If you thought about putting some effort in there to help disperse the work that comes to you.
Well, you know, I've never thought about it in terms of the job board. It might be because of being worried about who ends up taking it on. Will they do a good job or not? Will it kind of seem like it's my fault almost? That might be the honest answer. But one way I have worked with AIGA, I'm on the board of the LA chapter, and I helped bring the Design for Good initiative there, and we do kind of mini pro bono hackathons. Those are real event-based, you know, not very long-term, right? Some of them are 24 hours, some of them are 3 hours, more like strategy sessions. But that's been my main way of kind of linking up with AIGA. I think that AIGA could do more, kind of like how the legal industry really just all got behind the idea of public service just being part of a rite of passage to that industry. I've written about that before with not so much response, you know, but the idea that every designer should do some pro bono work to kind of have a rite of passage into the industry. I love that idea. Not everybody likes that idea though. Yeah. But yeah, AIGA is doing really cool things around Design for Good. The former White House creative director, Ashley, is doing a bunch of stuff with diversity and inclusion or racial justice issues or anything like that. So if you're interested in that, I mean, it seems to be keep on developing. New York's obviously the biggest chapter too, so you guys have all kinds of stuff at your fingertips, which is cool.
That's a great new women's initiative as well that launched last year.
Yeah, women's initiatives. We were doing some women's design salons in LA that were really popular as well. I thought that was a really great kind of addition, having people have a space where they can just be who they are, you know, and not you can't really go to an event with a woman on a panel and you like check the diversity box, you know, it has to be more integrated, more inclusive, yeah. Any other questions?
Any other books?
Not yet.
What about your computer sleeve or a signed backpack?
Yeah, I could.
What else have you got? Swiss Army knife.
It's like you guys are trick-or-treating or something, and all I have is a gold watch to give you, or yeah. But I don't wear watches, though.
I mean, that laptop's looking a little old. It's got lots of stickers on it.
Yeah.
Let's throw it out there.
It's got character.
It's got to be a great question.
It's got character, yeah. Well, if you are, oh yeah, go ahead.
Going back to the kind of preemptive social entrepreneur, in the way just that you think about this, I'm trying to get a sense of kind of how grand a visionary you're imagining this to be, like sort of how far out and to what extent then, how do you see designing for like users, right? Like actual people in the world now with a vision that's further out.
Yeah. Well, that's part of why I think it's really important. One of the last lines is, reaction and preemption, and balancing both of those things, because it can't be an excuse to not help people. That's one way this could be interpreted, which wouldn't be a correct way to interpret it. But it's more that we have to balance thinking about the future too. So in terms of getting people on board with it that are here right now, that's actually a great design opportunity, because design is really great at making things very tangible for people. So are the arts in general, right? The future is really intangible. We actually can never be in the future. It's like it doesn't exist, right? It's always just an idea. And as a result, we're the only people that can either screw it up or make it cool or make it helpful, maybe like those three things. So using design tools to make that a tangible experience, whether that's like an experiential thing, like a performance, or whether that's a product that's kind of like a diegetic prototype of sorts, that just kind of brings things back to earth for people, so that it doesn't have to be this big visionary thing. I don't think not only Steve Jobs is allowed to think about the future. It is a privilege to think about the future, but I don't think it has to be that much of a privilege. Hopefully it can be a very accessible thing, and you guys can help do that. Yeah.
Great. Well, I think there'll be lots of people who want to ask you questions one-on-one, so an incredible spirit of generosity.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. Yeah. Person, the kind of thing that I wanted to dedicate the rest of my life to. And so, I didn't have any money really to donate to him aside from some allowance, from doing random chores and whatnot. I also was not personally in a wheelchair, so I can't really teach someone in a wheelchair how to do things, because I wouldn't even know how to do it. But I figured, about like the week or two prior, I had gotten my first pirated copy of Photoshop from my godmother, who was studying art in Australia at the time. And I was starting to learn, the really important design skills of kind of making your head really big, or changing the color of your hair, or, the things that all of you did and maybe won't admit when you first got Photoshop. I figured, why not put these incredible skills to good use, and offered to design him some stickers. And that became my first pro bono project before I knew what pro bono was. It was my dad that told me what pro bono was after I did that, because he's a lawyer. And again, in the legal industry, there's some really strong ties there. So flash forward just 3 years after that, when I was 19, I launched verynice from my college dorm room, basically. And it's now a global design strategy consultancy that gives half of its work away for free to nonprofit organizations. So still very much inspired by that moment at the skate park, and really trying to figure out how can I make that an integral part of what we do as well. We work with all kinds of different clients. Half of them are nonprofits. The other half are really, really big nonprofits, or startups, or big businesses, or mom and pop shops, et cetera. Really kind of all over the place, and that's something that makes us a little bit interesting. I'm going to talk a little bit about that later as well. When we originally launched, we focused exclusively on visual design, so especially brand identity design, website design, et cetera. And then over the last 4 or 5 years, we've really transitioned to balance that more visual work on the left with more strategic work on the right, as well as developing our own tools and resources that we can offer to our clients and to the world at large. So over the course of that time, what's been interesting is we kind of keep accumulating more and more services that we offer. So instead of replacing services, we just kind of keep stacking.
I'm Alan Trochinov. I'm the chair of the MFA Products of Design Department, where you are now. So we are really excited to have Matt Manos here today, who took a red eye to be here. So that's full commitment. And he has the best name ever, which I think I've referred to lots of times as his business name, of verynice. And so everybody in the room knows that I remark and joke often about filtering for nice in this department. So you are the nicest. It's actually in your name. Also, I got an email 4 minutes ago from somebody who is looking for leads for work, and in the sentence writes, "I'm generally rather nice and also like other nice people." To which I responded, "I need your okay to read that sentence in the next 6 minutes because I'll be introducing Matt Manos and want to use it. I hope you get this email." And I did not get clearance. So that's anonymous. So there's that. So anyway, so I was looking at your biography, which is just completely ridiculous. It's hard to believe that anybody, particularly with just the number of years you have under your belt, could have accomplished all this much. I like the fact that you're calling yourself a neo-philanthropist. Matt's worked with UNICEF and Nations and Walt Disney Imagineering and Facebook and just all of these incredible organizations and brands. And then there's something else in here. Decks for Parks I did not know about. I have a new interest in longboarding, so we're going to have to talk about that.
Yeah.
But then he does mention in the bio side projects.
That is my MacBook Pro.
This is his computer.
Oh, if you just touch the mouse pad, we're good. There we go.
Okay. So you mentioned side projects in your bio, and I have met more and more people, as I've also said to you, who really, in some sense, judge people or hire people based on their side projects. Even people like
in the legal industry, actually in New York, and it soon trickled into a lot of other industries, especially the design industry. Around the time when the Ad Council was emerging, you guys have seen a lot of like Smokey the Bear advertisements and so on. They would recruit a lot of designers and marketers to volunteer to create these public service announcements. And soon people started to really see the benefits of pro bono and see that it's really helpful for the world, but also it's very gratifying for yourself and for your own practice. I got my start as a pro bono practitioner when I was 16 years old. That's when I could do stuff like this. I used to skateboard competitively, so happy to give you longboard lessons, Alan, for sure. Although I've never been that great at longboarding because I'm strangely afraid of going down hills, but being upside down is no problem for me. Although, I can only do this probably on like a 1-foot ramp at this point, but I try, right? So anyways, because I was competing as a skateboarder throughout high school and pretty much like maybe my first year of college, and that's when I stopped doing it competitively. I was always training, and this was in the Bay Area. I grew up in Silicon Valley. This park is in Sunnyvale, California. I would be there every Saturday, sometimes every Saturday and Sunday, and there'd always be kind of the regular crew of people that were hanging out and trying new stuff. But there was one weekend where I saw a man in a wheelchair in the bowl actually do a flip over one of the channels. And it completely blew my mind. This was pre-YouTube also, so it was before you saw really cool things all the time. So, obviously I was intrigued. I wanted to approach him, wanted to introduce myself, just kind of learn what was going on. And I noticed that he wasn't alone. He was with a bunch of little kids who were also in wheelchairs. And it appeared as though he was teaching them basically how to do this. And it turned out that he was the founder of a nonprofit that at the time taught kids in wheelchairs how to participate in extreme sports. This was kind of mind-blowing to me. I had never met the founder of a nonprofit organization before. Growing up in the Silicon Valley, everyone and their mother literally is the founder of something. But I had never met the founder of a nonprofit. And that passion that really radiated from him was very inspiring to me. And I knew this was the kind of thing it on. And they really span these 4 categories of visual communication. So again, kind of where we started, what you might think of a very traditional graphic design work, to digital product design, so entering that UX, UI space, design strategy, which is a huge section of what we do now around business design, brand strategy, marketing strategy, et cetera. And then even strategic foresight, so really looking at long-term implications of things for our clients, researching trends, et cetera. Our work is equally as diverse. This is just kind of a few quick ones to go through. This was a painting that we had commissioned from a good friend of mine, Dan Everett. He's the one that's positioned in the right image right there. His mom lived in a home that was really affected by fracking issues. And at the time we were working with NRDC on their Demand Clean Power campaign. which was all about fracking and the Keystone XL pipeline, et cetera. And we thought, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we got an artist that's been sort of touched by this cause to participate in this somehow? So we locked him in a room for 24 hours, him and myself and a filmmaker, and we basically videoed the process of him creating a painting that was inspired by that experience that he and his mom had. And so the result was this really weird thing on the left, which I love, that kind of depicts like an upper world and a lower world as well. And they ended up, you know, having this kind of in their collection and was part of a bigger campaign that we did. Also branding. So Katie, my wife's in the audience. She did the branding for this project with us called the Pasadena Museum of California Art. If any of you are ever in California, this is one of my favorite museums personally, because it focuses exclusively on California artists and themes and images that are inspired by California in general. It's actually really small, so it almost has the feeling of a gallery, and equally it rotates through exhibits all of the time. And so as a result, what we did with the branding and the identity is we had the letters, the image that's filling those letters change with every new exhibit that they have. So it's a dynamic identity. And we basically instruct the museum to take a close-up image of whatever the primary piece is. And
Google, it's like, yeah, we don't even look at the resume. We look at their side projects. And if side projects are interesting, then they're interesting. And that seems very consistent with not only what you might believe, which I don't know, but certainly with how you've led your life. So that's pretty amazing. So this is a bit of a long introduction, but we're really excited to have you. So please welcome Matt Manos.
All right, thanks so much.
This is Kate, by the way.
And my wife Kate's in the audience.
She's crashing the talk. So we'll use this for Q&A.
Cool. Well, thanks again so much for having me, and happy to be here. I was telling Alan right before, it kind of feels like I'm in somebody's home because of the kitchen, too, in the background, which makes this just so much nicer than talking in a regular old conference room as well. But yeah, so this, I'm going to kind of throw several things at you, but in general, this is about being very nice, giving half, creating models of impact, and inventing the future. So I'm going to try to walk you guys through a little bit of my story, as well as some of these side projects that are going on, some of these new projects that are just wrapping up as well. And then hopefully we can have a little bit of a discussion about what you guys are doing, and we can use this time to help you out with your projects too, which would be great. So I always start my story with this number, which is $8 billion. And that is the amount of money that nonprofit organizations in the United States alone are spending every single year on people like me, on design and marketing professionals. And I don't know about you guys, but that number to me is very disturbing, because I like to imagine what the world would look like if they could have the same really important access to those great services without this hefty amount, right? So in my mind, you know, if we could actually allow them to invest more in their cause, we might be able to make even more impact in the world. And again, design and marketing is really important. They need that. But maybe there's new models to make it more affordable or to lower the barrier to entry. And if we can do that, and if they can invest more in their cause, perhaps we can solve some of the world's most persistent problems, like hunger, like housing, water access, et cetera. The list kind of goes on. This is sort of where pro bono comes in. Pro bono is short for pro bono publico, which literally means for the good of the public. It got its start